Okay, there we go. Good morning, everybody. Today is August 11, 2021. This is our Kubernetes SIG API Machinery bi-weekly meeting. We have a number of interesting topics today in the agenda, and I think we're going to see some good discussions and presentations. So without further ado, who do I handle the presentation powers to? Joe or Cici for the first topic?
Let's start with Cici.
Okay. So I will stop presenting. Cici, I think you have to request permission to present or to share your screen, and I will approve.
Yeah, give me 1 second.
Yes. Perfect.
I'm not sure if.
Yeah, we can see it. But we are seeing your entire screen. I don't know if that is.
Sorry, let me change the mode.
There you go. Perfect.
Yeah. So today we're presenting an improvement for the CRD validation. So we'll cover like the overview of the current way we're doing CRD validation and the pinpoint we identified and our proposal. And we'll list some alternatives under consideration. And finally, there will be a demo to show the proof of concept and all the comparisons. So let's start with the overview. So the CRD is one of the main way people extend Kubernetes, and currently like the validation support kind of aligned with three parts. One is through the CRD structure schema for type checking, and the second is through the Open API v3 validation, which covers the regular expression, range limits, size limits for maps and list. And also API expression working group is also working on an CRD validation improvement through Open API v3 for formats, immutability, and unions, which will be covered in a separate cap. And for more complicated use cases, the customers have to develop their own admission webhooks for the validation. So here comes of the pinpoints. For the first two, building validation does not support like the complex validation rules, and the admission webhook just takes too much efforts, not only in terms of the users have to put a lot of development efforts on developing their own webhooks, but also they have to like integrate it with maybe the monitoring, alerting, or release processes, and also it increased the operational complexity. Also, like the potential webhook failures might cause the whole community control plan outage. So here is our So here is our proposal. So we propose to integrate an inline expression language directly into CRDs. So hopefully that could get a large portion of validation use cases covered without the use of webhooks. And there will be a field added as a x-kubernetes-validators, which covers like multiple rules customized by users depending on their needs, and especially for cross-fields validations. And our plan is first apply it for the validation, and further might expand it to defaulting and conversion as well, as long as the inline expression language was embedded. And I think Joe will talk about the alternatives we have and together with the demo, or you want me to cover the alternatives?
Yeah, I can talk over them really quick. So Rego is used by like the, what is it, open policy system. They run that as a webhook. You can do a lot of validation in it. It's a pretty full-fledged language. It's designed to be written as like a separate file that you load in. So you load in your Rego all as a separate file. It's a pretty like complicated thing that you can have modules and packages for and dependencies between those. And so as an inline language, it's not really appropriate. It does do a lot of advanced stuff, but we're kind of trying to target that more specific use case of I want to be able to just write some expressions that can allow me to do things like cross-field validation and checking things that aren't covered by the very basic validation that you get with OpenAPI. EXPR is actually very similar to Cell. So I'm not actually going to say that that's necessarily a bad choice. When we looked at options, a couple of the reasons we chose Cell would also be a couple of the reasons you would choose EXPR. So as we do experimentation, we could potentially like decide to pick something else, but Cell seems like a good starting point. WebAssembly is another interesting way to do like loading to validation. You can imagine people could, write in any program language they want, some, validation rules, and then they could load them up into WebAssembly and run them in a sandbox way. It turns out that creating WebAssembly and integrating it is a fairly involved thing. And this might be good for larger programs. It's not really good for really small snippets and expressions. And it's also a lot harder to sandbox in something like Cell. There are examples out there of people building systems where you write your own webhook and then you can tell it which WebAssembly modules you do things with in Kubernetes. So there are examples of people doing that, but I think for the use cases that we're trying to support, that's not a very good fit. In fact, we experimented with that one quite a bit. Of course, the next option would be, well, nothing works, so let's build our own thing. That I don't think we've hit that point yet. I think a lot of the use cases we're trying to do are just a little bit beyond what OpenAPI supports, but Cell's a pretty reasonable grammar, right? Most people that come with a C or Java or Go background or JavaScript or whatever can pretty much make sense of what's going on in these expressions. They're pretty easy to read. So we think it's actually, we're not to the point where we're going to like bail out and say we need to build our own thing. Although, who knows, maybe it will come to that. I'm hopeful it doesn't. And then, the other option would be to make webhooks easier to use. I think there's still value to doing that. We're trying to support like the 80% use case where people are trying to do stuff simple enough that they really just didn't want to get into a webhook in the first place. And so I think, there's still value to improving webhooks, but I don't really see them as getting so easy that it's to the point where, you wouldn't even want to have something right in the CRDs themselves, right? It's so nice to have it in the CRD because it's packaged right there with the CRD. You don't have to worry about this separate binary running somewhere that has to be paired with, the right version of the CRD and upgraded and rolled back and all the other things that come along with that. I think that's what I'll say about that. I'm going to try. I've been having the worst trouble getting a demo today, but I'm going to try. I had trouble with this demo once before. I'm going to try and show this if I can. My Kubernetes cluster just crashed, so it might not be doable again, but we're going to try it. I'm going to share my screen.
Hey, yeah.
Share screen. Window.
We can see it.
Okay, great. So let's see if, I think the thing I'm having the most trouble with is actually just getting my Kubernetes. While this starts back up, well, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a CRD and I'm going to, we're going to imagine that we're going to be using Cell like this when we actually integrate it into Kubernetes. You would probably somewhere say that you've got a validation rule. You'd be able to say, put it pretty much anywhere you wanted in the schema, and that would be kind of the root of it. So if I put it in the spec, I would have direct access to all the fields in the spec, which includes replicas, min replicas, and max replicas. And the rule I want to say here is that min replicas should be less than equal to replicas, and replicas should be less than equal to max replicas. So a pretty simple, cross-field validation rule. The way I'm going to run this is I'm going to run a webhook, and I'm going to run Cell on the webhook, and I'm going to hook it so all of these CRD objects go through that webhook. And so instead of having this, I'm just going to switch it out and say this format rule. It's the same exact logic. I'm just jamming it into this format string, which I'm allowed to kind of put anything into, and I'm going to kind of hijack that just for this demo. This isn't how we would do it for real. If I get a API server going, There's going to be a couple things I want to show with this. The first is that you can register this CRD. And then what you can do is if you have an object, then if this is invalid, that we're obviously going to check for that validation rule. The other thing that I would like to show, and this is one of the reasons I like cell, is if you modify this field name and make it like invalid, that when I reapply this CRD, it's actually going to not let me, it's not going to let me make that change because there is no field called Mac replicas. There's only one called Mac replicas. And so, or I could put something really obvious here, like a couple X's or something. And so I'm actually going to get what is effectively a compile error because there's no field called this. Cell allows you to, whenever you can do two phases on a program. First, you can basically parse it and compile it into an AST. And then you store that program in memory, and then you can run it later. And when you kind of compile the program, you can get type checking. So we get the type checking. It seems kind of nice to type check this. One of the things that might not be so obvious, but is really great, is if you decide to rename this field down here, you'll also get the error, right? Because you didn't keep this in sync, and so now there's no field called that, which means it's really easy for developers to make sure everything's kept in the proper state. And I think that's kind of a really nice feature to have. It just makes things a lot safer to develop. Let's see, I think we've almost got that same. And then the last thing I was going to mention is that you can go and we wanted to make sure that any solution that we provided was going to work not just for validation, but also for other use cases where you might want an expression language. And the other two that immediately came to mind were defaulting and CRD conversion. One of the nice things about cell is that not only can you return like a Boolean true or false for an expression, you can return any value. So, one of the things that we might want to be able to do is say, I want to rename a field. So here I called this image2 for the V2 of this schema. And in V1, it was just called image, right? So I've just renamed a field from image to image2. Now, we wouldn't really express this way, but since I have to jam stuff in a format stream, this is what I've done. I've just said, well, we're going to convert a field from V1, and I'm going to rename it to image2. We can probably come up with really nice formats for this, and we're not going to probably put it in the schema. We're probably going to go ahead and put that down in the CRD conversions. I don't know if you saw that in the examples, but we would probably have like, where you have like the webhook converter, you'd probably instead have like a conversion rules converter, and we would include a bunch of conversion rules there. Let's see. Okay, so let's see if this, let's see if we can actually try this out. So I'm going to load my webhook and try and load my CRD. It's still not fully started. I'm a little worried about that. Let's see. Okay, yeah, so there we go. So there's the validation failing because, well, let me just show you why that failed. In my invalid object, I put min replicas all the way up to 7, which doesn't match our rule. So if I put that back down to 3, then I go apply that again. Now it's fine. Now let's go back and let's mess with this CRD really quick, just to show one of those examples. So let's take and misname min replicas. And then we will go ahead and just apply the CRD again. And this is where you get that compiler. This is where it tells you very clearly, like, I don't know what that is. It doesn't seem real. It was in your thing. And yeah, so that's the demo. There's a lot of things that are not, fully worked out here. We're just kind of getting through ideas. We're very interested in feedback on, from people on what kind of use cases they would want to see supported. If people know of other alternatives or systems they would like to see, we'd be very interested in that. We're also very interested in getting a KEP up to the provisional state. Right now, we have a really rough draft of some ideas. We're very curious on what people would like to see, especially leadership, on what we would want to get a KEP kind of to the early stages, and then maybe what we would take to get an idea like this all the way to alpha. Thank you.
I got It was a nice demo. I do have some questions about capability, and much of this is just because I'm not very familiar with CEL. It said cell.
Yeah.
So does it have the idea of predicated statements? A lot of cases where I have validating admission webhooks is a case of if this value is set to something, I want this rule to have an effect.
Yep. Yes, you do. Yep.
Okay.
You have if-else expressions. There are some transform utilities. So yeah, a lot of that's in place. So like if we use it in defaulting, you'd be able to say like, if this field over there is X, then do Y, right? Set this to Y, otherwise set it to something else. And you could also be concatenating together other fields or, doing things like that.
Would it also be able to express things like set once fields, where like it's okay for this not to have a value, but once you set it, I guess you'd be able to phrase that as a predicate maybe? Once you set it, you can't change it.
We would probably do
so.
immutability a different way, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd have to look into those use cases, but that's one I'll write down. Well, I think one way or another, we do want to support that. Whether or not we give you access to like the previous state of the object, and you can check that and make sure it hasn't changed or hasn't changed in a particular way. That's something that wouldn't be built into Cell, but we can choose what data Cell has access to. Like your program, basically give it a bunch of root objects, and then it has access to the things within those. And so we can we could potentially, like in conversion, we give it all the contents of the object you're converting from, and in a defaulting case, you might be able to have access to a bunch of other fields. So that's something we'd have to make very clear choices about.
Okay, because I do think that's one of the pieces that I really like in our current validators is that on update, I have access to the old object to be able to make decisions.
Okay, yeah, that's something we'll definitely track.
I mean, we're not saying that this replaces every possible sort of validation you might want to do.
Sure, but like those are like the first 5 I've written, right? Like I'm looking back, like I actually have a list. And those are like the first 5 we wrote. So
okay.
I didn't have a view of all the people. There's hands.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I think Mo was first.
Yeah.
Thanks. I was just gonna ask if you guys had looked at Starlark. Similarly to Cell has a Go implementation, is thread safe and all of those things. It also looks more like a generic programming language because it's effectively Python embedded.
I think I looked at it briefly. I'm willing to include it in our alternatives. We're being pretty cautious about the runtime of the embedded languages, and we're trying to pick something that is very safe to run on the API server. So like Cell and EXPR are highly sandboxed and really constrained, and while they also limit what you can do, it also makes it really safe. And we love the idea of that, like if you get a CRD, like you don't feel like you have to go through a security review and check if like there's arbitrary code in there that might be risky.
Yeah,
really
if I can pipe up also, I had occasion to use Starlark fairly recently and I hated it.
I was just going to mention a lot of the security properties you're mentioning, like the Go implementation of Starlark does allow you to have those like time constraints, memory constraints. You get to choose what the functions can input and output.
Okay.
I don't think they can do any IO. You have to give them the capability of doing IO.
Yeah, let me add it to our list. I think it's worth looking at. It sounds like enough people have seen it that we should have an answer. I also want to say that right now we're not super tied to Cell specifically. We're more tied to like a feature set of, we want something we can compile and type check. We want something that's sandboxed. We want something that's expressive enough. And right now, Cell is a great thing to experiment with. So yeah, let's look at it. We'll do some comparisons. Hopefully in the next time we talk about this in more detail, we can have more answers about that.
I'd also say that at least the paradigm you chose where you were adding little snippets of rules depends on those snippets being an expression. And Starlark, from what I've dealt with it, is more suited for like procedural, like blocks of code. So yeah,
sounds more like
choose a different. different paradigm. Not that that's necessarily a blocker, just an observation. Okay, let's go to the next hand. Jason?
Hi, yeah. I love Cell. Great language, good choice. In the Tecton community, we have also experimented some with Cell for similar sorts of things, and it's been pretty successful so far. I wonder if if this is successful and these take off, I can imagine lots and lots and lots of validation rules. The way that you described it in the demo was Cell, inline, and YAML, which two white space aware languages in the same file might be a difficult developer experience. We've experienced that as well in Tecton, don't get me wrong. I'm curious if you've thought at all about the developer experience of writing, very, very complex expressions or many tiny expressions either way, and how that works. Would that be something like you could explore something like KubeBuilder validation where it's done in Go struct tags? Now you've got white space aware Cell inside of Go comments, which is differently hard. Or you could imagine some sort of embedding scheme where you have .cell files that you somehow compile into those things. I just wonder if you thought about any of these, like the developer experience of writing a bunch of Cell in this.
Probably not enough. I think it's something we're going to have to spend some time and look at some bigger examples. One of the things I like about the inline approach is that you don't necessarily have to have like a huge thing, right? Like if you can do individual fields right there with the field, it does kind of spread the code over a little bit, but it keeps it really close to the field definition instead of having like one root level validator that validates like a whole object, if that makes sense. Which isn't to say that you couldn't have really complicated rules, but I'm kind of hoping that it doesn't get out of control. There might be some things that we can do to help with that. So one of the things that you can do in Cell is that you can provide a built-in set of functions. And we're going to have to be very careful when we define these. So there's probably things that we're going to want that are maybe Kubernetes specific, that we're going to want to have really easy ways to validate with. And we're not going to want to make people write like a complex rule every time they want to do something basic. So for that kind of stuff, maybe we can help keep things trim. I really want to see how far we can go and keep things from getting really huge. If things do get really huge, I kind of feel like this approach of inlining stuff isn't working super great. But I would love to see use cases. I would love to see counterexamples that prove me wrong. It's like, this is a totally reasonable thing to do, and here's like, it has to be big and messy and in Cell. So if you have those, I'd love to see them.
Yeah, I could definitely go through. We currently do a lot of validation with webhooks. I could try to rewrite that in Cell and see how unwieldy it gets. It might be a bunch of tiny rules, in which case it's perfect. So
yeah.
Also, if that would be super helpful.
Yeah. And I would love to see just the webhook too. Even if you don't get time to do that, which I'd love you to do, I'd love to see the aura of those things.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Next, thanks a bunch. That was great. I think we'll probably have more to say on the CAP. I agree that I think the next step is a CAP. Does that sound right, David? David,
yeah,
absolutely
I agree.
agrees with me. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. All right. Next up. That would be Kevin.
That is Kevin, yes.
Kevin, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
And also we can't tell because we are using a face mask. Kevin, you there? No, he's frozen.
Oh, okay. The mute icon is flashing. All right, maybe we can come back to this one.
Sure. Yeah, maybe that's a good idea. Do we have Howard?
Hey,
Here
yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to talk about this one, and then we go back to Kevin if you can?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, all yours.
Cool. Yeah. So I wanted to introduce this KEP that I've been working on, which is about adding what I've been calling prioritized leader election. The general idea behind this is that today we use leader election, but we run into some issues because we have multiple different instances of our controller that has different properties. So the like most useful or like most common issue we have is that we run multiple different versions of the same controller because we do like a canary rollout. So we may have, say, version 1, version 2, and version 3 of the controller in the cluster at the same time. And at any given time, a random one of those becomes the leader. And so you may get wildly different behavior if version 1 is leader versus version 3. Potentially worse behavior because hopefully version 3's had some improvements. And so what we're interested in doing is kind of having a prioritization or a weighting on who becomes the leader. And so the KEP is kind of generic, where you can define any sort of key and then some comparison function to decide if you're kind of a higher weight. In the case of versions, that would be like, if my version is newer than the current leader's version, then I will take the leader election lock. Some other use cases we thought about were if there's like kind of different resource sizes. So if you have like an instance that has a lot of CPU and one that has a small amount of CPU, let the one with high CPU take over. We've also thought about this in the context of multi-cluster. So if you have your controller running in, say, China and US, then maybe you have the one that's in China take care of things in China and the one in US take care of things in the US, but still allow kind of failing over if one of them goes away. So that's the general idea. I think one of the main challenges with this is that it would involve an API change to the lease API, which is a V1 API. Aside from that, the implementation itself is relatively straightforward, I think.
I was gonna say, like, I don't know about I was gonna say I don't want this feature, but then I got to thinking, would we use this feature in controllers, in our own controllers, and then because we do have the situation where you upgrade them all at once and a random one gets the leader election, but then I thought a little bit more, and I'm not sure how that works on rollback. When in rollback situation, you want it to go the opposite direction.
Yeah, so I guess in rollback, when you have both still running concurrently, the newest one, if you set up your leader election that way, would still be the leader. But eventually, once the new one's gone, it would, release the lock, whether that's automatically or after it times out. So it would still work somewhat in that way. In our actual use case, this would be for Istio. We actually are not planning to use newest version always wins. We instead actually have a way for the user to specify what is like the default version. So they'll explicitly say like, this version is the best one, use that one. And so we work around that in that way. But that's, I don't think that would be the most common usage.
Actually, even if we were going to use it, Daniel, wouldn't we want oldest always wins, and then once they're all upgraded, they upgrade? I guess it doesn't really matter. My question actually is, one of my questions is, have you designed a way to avoid having two active leaders since you're trying to forcibly take control of a lease? And how does that change the overall semantics of the type?
Yeah, that is not something that I've solved. I wasn't sure. That's a good question. So for us, we don't actually care if there's two leaders. It's more of an optimization that there's not more than one. But like, is there ever really a guarantee that there's not two leaders? Because at any point they could still be leading and just be failing to update the lock, right?
Well, I will note.
Although this does make it much more common.
You open the presentation saying you had a preference between your leaders. So like, I'm going to assume there's a preference. There's also like, yes, there are theoretical races, particularly time skew, during which you can end up with two leaders, but they are fairly minimal. And this would seem to be changing it into, I won't say a common case, but it's no longer a rare case. is it possible to build an API? It seems like it'd be possible to build an API with enough like latches during a graceful release and knowing someone else is taking it to avoid the situation.
Yeah, it does seem possible. Like you could somehow indicate to the other client, like, I am going to take over the lock, please release it. And then once you've released it, I will take it over. One issue if we do that is it would require that everyone, like all the clients are updated to have that code. Otherwise, they won't understand that someone's about to take the lock and they should lose it, right? I guess maybe not. I guess if you're smart enough, you could take the lock but not actually start doing anything until it would have expired.
Yeah,
I'd have to think about that a bit more.
Case.
Yeah.
Until a graceful release, until you're guaranteed that somebody else had written. But that information isn't currently in the API, right? So that would be another API change to include.
Yeah, I was thinking like they would, if you're trying to steal the lock, you would just take over the lock, put your identity in there or whatever, and update the fields, and then you would wait until it would have expired, and then you start acting.
Right. It doesn't tell you how long that. I guess that tells you the duration, total possible duration. It doesn't tell you when the next renew attempt will be.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I'll say I find the idea interesting, but I don't know that I can say it would bubble high enough in my review list to make a delivery in a 123. I don't know about you, Daniel.
This wasn't on my radar. This is the first I've heard of this. I'm liking it more than I expected to, but I think the question you're asking is pretty valid. And if we're going to include this in like the official API, we need to have a good answer for it. So
listed as looking for someone to help with potentially, and I guess.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to promise reviews, but we do have other people. So like I guess I wouldn't say no, but it's probably not my priority must-have list. Yeah. I don't know how important is it for you, John?
It's pretty important to us, but our backup plan is that we'll just fork the library and use that. In the library is like 100 lines of code, and we use the config map lock anyway, so there's no API change needed. The only concern we have with that is that if the API that we choose in the fork does not meet what's actually done, if or when it ever goes upstream, then we'll have some migration issues. That's obviously not a problem if we never plan to accept this. But it would be nice.
I'm not making that statement, or at least I'm not making that statement now. But I just want to make you aware that I don't know offhand of someone who is asking to have it who would also be a suitable approver on that sort of an API change.
Yep.
Yeah.
You might want to try to like start shopping around for them.
If you package this with also fixing the default controllers to take advantage of this and improve the upgrade experience, then upgrade safety, then I become more interested, I think. Yeah, I think Walter and maybe Jordan could be persuaded to be interested in that also. That's my guess.
Okay.
So
yes. So I think there's already a cap there and nobody's looked at it. Is that the state that we're in right now?
Yeah, but it sounds like it will need a few updates after this meeting, but there is a start of one.
Okay. Yeah, you can ping me when you think it's ready for a review, and I will have figured out what the next step is at that point.
Okay.
I think Walter's got a hand.
Yeah, sorry, Walter.
Yeah, no worries. I'm not sure that it'll cause a problem, but I do think one thing you want to make sure you walk through. A couple of our migration use cases involve holding multiple sort of ordered leader election locks. And so I think both when we've done things like migrated from one type of leader lock resource to another, and also the controller manager migrator, both have this tendency to hold multiple leader election locks. So we should make sure we walk through those use cases with this.
Yeah, in fact, you probably need a way to definitely hold the lock, even if somebody of a higher priority is sitting around, because you're performing something incredibly important, like migrating between two mechanisms of leader election.
Right.
But yeah, okay. If you, I will allow Daniel to volunteer me. That's fine.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. It's always fun to get a surprising Kep.
Thank you. It would be good for us if there's opinions on the actual name of the field, which is right now key. That may make our lives easier if we do decide to go down the route of implementing this early in our controller.
Okay. Yeah, we can probably come up with a better name. Yeah, wait is definitely better.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I would appreciate any comments on there. So thanks everyone.
All right, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Sorry about that. Yeah, so this is Kevin, and I wanted to chat briefly about server-side unknown field validation, and I've got a skeleton of a doc of a KEP for this, but just kind of wanted to validate the core goals of this and the API changes that I'm proposing, and if everyone's cool with that, then I'll put together a full KEP. But basically, the way that like schema validation currently works is it's client side, and that's the -- validate flag on kubectl, and this has a lot of issues. You can read the attached issues there in the motivation section, and for years we've been trying to get rid of the client side validation. It needs to be re-implemented across clients, stuff like that. And the only blocker that's stopping us from being able to remove validation, the one kind of use case that we want to keep, is for unknown fields. So if you send in an object to the API server and you pass on some unknown fields with the validate equals true flag, it'll error if you give it unknown fields, and it won't error. It'll just drop those fields if you don't have that validate flag. And so basically, the goal here is to implement that on the server side. And if everyone's in agreement that we want to do that, then kind of the question at hand is how do we want the API to learn about this? How do we opt into this on the API server? And there's a couple ways that I proposed, and I think the most consistent way is the content type header. So passing in, currently we have media type parameters that we can pass in on the content type header. So like if you want to receive a table, you can do content type application/JSON / table or something like that. And so we want to do something similar for the validation, where you can give it like a content type header of application/JSON validation equals strict, and this will then tell the API server to treat the JSON it receives as it should check that there are no excessive fields and error if there are. And that's kind of the question that I wanted to pose to everyone. And the alternative I suggest is like a query parameter, and in the design details below, I kind of talk about why that is a lot more painful than doing it with the content type header. But also the content type header is, I think, kind of more idiomatic. for what we're doing here. So that's kind of the question, and I wanted to get some thoughts on that.
So I didn't get a chance to read this ahead of time. Sorry, I didn't notice it. But I'm interested in how you do this with our protobuf library and how you do it with the JSON library that we use, which I don't believe is standard JSON, is the standard JSON decoder. It was JSON iter or something last time I looked. I don't know if it has this capability.
Yeah, so the answer to the JSON iter question is that also supports the disallow unknown fields in the same way that encoding/JSON does. So I don't think that shouldn't be an issue. It's I think it claims to be a exact match of the standard library's JSON package, just more performant or something. And,
what about duplicate fields though? Because it's not just unknown; it's also duplicate fields.
Right. So duplicate fields it also checks for in the strict. We currently have a test case for this in the JSON test serializer package in Kubernetes. So that should work there. And for the protobuf question, I think that is a good question. There was a discussion I had with Joe about this, and I'm trying to find those notes. But basically,
I mean, for proto, I'm not saying this is the best answer, but one answer is we've never heard anybody complain about this for proto, so we could say that this flag only covers JSON or YAML at the moment, and return an error if you try to use this flag with a proto format.
Yeah, I'm in favor with that for now. If we ever did want to support proto, we could in the future, but I don't feel like it's urgent. I don't know if anybody would use it.
David, have you encountered people with wrong or duplicate proto field numbers?
I can't say that I remember it, but I mean, client-side validation has not been a thing that I've been like burning to have. So anyway, it occurred to me as like, I don't even know how you could do that, because by the time we get the object, it's not there.
Yeah. So I don't know, what do you think of the idea of just erroring if you try to use this field on proto until we, like saying we're not going to support that off the bat?
I don't know
I think that's fine.
that I specifically have a problem with it. It seems like a reasonable question.
Yeah, good question. Nice edge case. Does anyone have an issue with this proposal? Like, it seems like a pretty large improvement over the client side having to opt into this, and do a special validation run beforehand.
I think the client still has to opt into this. But
yeah, the client still has to opt in. It's just they don't have to manually do it. It seems pretty good to me. The only question is like how much work and effort and review time, blah blah. So that's that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so I think the next step from here is that I will finish the KEP around the implementation kind of design of the patch use case, which I think is a lot more involved than the create and update use case. And I think from there we'll have kind of a full KEP and a better understanding of the effort and review time required for this. But those are the next steps.
Yeah, I think it's probably okay to support one verb at a time if post and put are significantly easier than patch.
Okay, good to know. I'll mention that on the design then.
I think apply should be relatively easy to support because you can just try deserializing it because it should deserialize because that's the format of apply. So it's the other patch formats that will be the difficult ones.
Cool.
Yeah, so I think a KEP sounds like the next step on that to me.
Will do.
I do have another question. Once you have the ability to detect this, do you plan to send back warnings when fields are unknown sort of unconditionally? or do you not see value there?
Are you saying warning when you don't set the validate flag, or when validate is false?
I'm saying if you can detect that someone is trying to set a field that isn't present, is that worthy of a warning?
Yeah, it's like if you opt in, then it's an error, and if you don't opt in, then it's a warning. That sounds like a great user experience. I'm just not sure about the performance consequence of this.
I'd be interested in knowing before trying to take a design in either direction, just because we have talked about in kubectl having a treat warnings as errors concept. So if you already got a warning, treat the warning as an error. It's just one of those alternatives I think I'd like to at least see considered.
Yeah, that sounds we should definitely consider that.
Yeah, so I think the question there is how much of a performance hit is it to do the validation? And I mean, I guess if you are, if that, like, one of the goals here is to not break existing, existing users, but it sounds like if the concern is that kubectl is moving to treating warnings as errors, then that's already gonna break existing users, right? So.
Well, that part that's optional, right? Like you don't have to treat warnings as errors.
Yeah.
I think David's proposing that instead of like opting into this particular kind of error, you could just opt into making all warnings errors, and then this is a warning, so you get that for free.
I see.
Yeah,
and then you don't have to worry about the client-side validation stuff at all.
Yeah, when I heard it, I was thinking of like, that parameter having like a third state, right? So you could either have it absent, which is the current behavior, you could have it strict, which is error out, or you could have even another state which warns, and then people would even have to opt into the warning, which might be nice for rolling this out because there might be a performance implication.
I mean,
do we not think we'll be able to determine a performance implication before we build it?
So I'm actually thinking about this, and like for post and put, like you're just gonna decode it with a special option, and if there's no problem with it, you don't have to like redecode it or anything like that. So I think the performance implication should be very minimal. For patch, I agree that it's less obvious how that's going to shake out.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the concern with the create and update, and there is a comment on the JSON serializer that we use that says if you do the strict option, you're taking a performance hit. So I haven't totally validated that myself, but
okay,
it claims it's less performant.
Okay, in that case, I do think if you can prototype and get us some just preliminary ballpark performance numbers, it seems like we might want to just do it all the time rather than only when you ask for it. That would simplify the design a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Sounds good. I'll do that.
Yeah, so I think that's the next step here is to get some performance numbers.
Cool.
All right.
Okay. I think we may have time to the last topic today from Eddie. We want to jump into that one.
Sure. So this is hopefully a quick one. We had an issue come through. This user observed that they were not seeing their timeout respected with kubectl. And the issue turns out to be that discovery clients will, because of Go's default typing, a value of 0, which is what we specify in the documentation for ClientGo, is to pass a 0, which means no timeout. The problem is that the code specifically says if it's 0, it adds the default timeout. So it's kind of just like weird loop. So like a -1 will work to not do a timeout, but if a user tries to set 0, which is what we specify, it ignores that and does the default timeout anyway. And this is for all discovery clients.
do we set defaults on other clients as well?
I didn't look at any other clients. This one was a fun one to go through the call stack of to figure out what was going on. But that's the issue, is that we specify in the ClientGo docs actually specify a value of 0 means no timeout. But with Discovery Client, you can't set it to 0. So I'm not necessarily looking for an answer on this. Jordan's already commented a few times, but he's super busy. So if anyone else wants to take a peek at it.
Yeah, I guess my question was, do the other clients do this or just this one? I don't actually know off the top of my head.
That's a good question. I can look at the source later.
Is this just a mismatch between the kube control documentation and the ClientGo behavior? Or is it a mismatch between the ClientGo documentation and the ClientGo behavior?
So Discovery Client lives in ClientGo, and ClientGo is documented a value of 0 means no timeout. So I would say this is a ClientGo issue.
Okay. It seems reasonable to me to just fix ClientGo. I'm not sure if it's the documentation or the behavior that needs to be fixed.
I'd like to know if every single one of our clients for all time has had this behavior, I'd probably update the docs. If just the Discovery client has done this, I would try to find a way to update the Discovery client.
Yeah.
But I don't know offhand which that is.
Yep. Yeah. Once again, raising questions about whether David and I are really the same person or not.
All right, I'll take a look at the other clients, and we can figure it out from there. I think the other clients do respect the timeout because you are able to set timeout for the rest of ClientGos. Whatever kube control uses to make API requests, that is, I'm assuming that's ClientGo.
Yeah, there are some dragons lurking in the timeout handling because we have different notions of timeouts for different requests, especially watches. Like you tell the server what the timeout you think should be, and then the server will close your connection eventually, which is not how most normal people think a timeout should work. Yeah, so it may be more confusing than you expect.
Okay, I will take a look at the other clients and I will comment on it. We talked about this in SIG CLI and we kind of punted it and said this is probably SIG API Machinery to help us with this one. So
yeah, I'd be happy to look at it's probably just going to be a PR, and I don't know if it'll be fixing a comment or doing something else, but yeah, probably won't be too big.
This PR removes the default timeout totally, so I don't think this PR is the way to go at all. But this surfaced out of reviewing that PR.
Yeah, we like that 32 seconds because it makes it easy to notice in the logs.
Yeah,
we're probably not going to take that one. No.
Cool. All right, thanks, team.
All right, thank you.
Okay. I propose that we added this item in the last minute. I propose we bump it for the next meeting and we close the meeting here. We're not going to have time.
Yeah, I don't think we can handle this in 4 minutes.
Yeah.
Good.
Sounds good. Well, that was a very productive meeting. Thank you to everybody for showing up, the demos, the discussion, and the respect. We'll see you next time. Have a
Thanks, everybody.
Wednesday. Bye-bye.